We'll talk a little bit about what is going on right now. And some of you may know all this very well, but I'm going to go through it so you can understand here. We got into trouble in 06. That's when it was inevitable that there was a crash in the financial market that was coming. In 08, that's when Bear Stearns collapsed, Lehman Brothers, International Monetary Fund said, we're on the brink of a systematic meltdown. 15 major banks collapsed right away, and their Standard & Poor's Case-Shiller Home Index reported the largest drop in its history in home prices. 18 months later, the Dow Jones Industrial Average had lost 54% of its value. Okay? Over 18 months. In August 2010, about 5-6 months ago, we had 118 major institutions that had already failed, and 829 banks were in trouble, could possibly go down, and those banks represented almost $500 billion in assets. Economic commentators were comparing the era to come with that of the Great Depression. That's where we were heading. Okay? Anybody in here kind of a history buff at all? Anybody follow the Great Depression? When all this bad stuff started coming, did anybody get real excited and start looking back at the Great Depression and start doing some research and looking at things? It's kind of what everybody did, right? Black Tuesday came, let me go back there. That was, you know, it followed Black Thursday, and we basically lost 23% in the stock market, in the Dow Jones, in one day. There was a decline, in a single day, okay? 90% almost of the value was gone by 1932. It was at the end of 1929, and then in 1932, it had already gone down to 10% of what it once was. 2 out of every 5 commercial banks had failed, and 1 out of 4 men was unemployed, excuse me. Anybody want to care to guess, kind of, anybody have any theories? There's lots of different theories, and one big one. Why did that all happen? Anybody know in the room?
Perception. Margin. People played in margin.
Margins. Absolutely. Margin buying. It always goes back to the financing every single time. You've got irresponsible people, and they're backed by irresponsible banks. There was more money being lent out so people could trade stocks than there was in circulation in the economy at that time. That's what got us into trouble. The gross domestic product of the United States was cut in half. I mean, it was gone. You can imagine in a period from 1929 to 1933, now those were bad times. I mean, you can imagine how much more terrible it was than today. But today things are a little bit different. We have a support system, and we learned a lot from that time. Actually, here's the graph from the Great Depression of gross domestic product. And this is actually very characteristic of any recession. This is what you see 90% of the time, okay? You've got the tipping points right here. Here's Black Tuesday, right? Right there at tipping point there is when things started to turn around. Obviously the economy came back when everybody thought the country was doomed. Something happened and it began to grow. Then you've got FDR takes office, right? And there's a lot of government action going on. You know, they had all these tariffs and things like that. They raised taxes. The highest tax bracket was 79%. Can you imagine? You might as well move to Canada, right? 79%, you make $1 million and you're walking away with a little over 300 grand. I mean, it's ridiculous. Now, the government steps in, they do a lot of things. They've got their witch hunt, they're pointing their fingers, and they're trying to chase everybody down. You know, Mellon and all those guys they're on, you know, being sued by Uncle Sam, basically. And that's where you see the double dip, right? Just kind of like we experienced. There was massive government intervention. Probably could have been more, you know, obviously.
That's when the war started too.
Yep, and then at the end,
38.
yep. And it starts to come back right here, and we're starting to be on our way back, and that's exactly what happened. And then the war came in, and it pushed us way over the top, actually. We started at $104 billion as a gross domestic product prior to the Great Depression, you know, in the roaring period. And then, you know, when we came back, we didn't just come back to where we were. We launched off, and a lot of that was because of the war. But anyhow, a lot of people were very, very scared, just like they were, you know, 4, 5, 6 months ago, just like they are today. They were very frightened as to what's going to happen. They were afraid about inflation, you know, deflation, everything you could possibly think of. People were terrified. They never thought the country would ever come back. But there were other people that knew it would. This is the richest person who has ever lived, okay? This is John D. Rockefeller. You know, in his day, if he were alive today, he'd be well more wealthy than, based on today's standards, than Carlos Slim or Bill Gates or, you know, anybody else. But anyway, he saw it coming the whole time. He had this quote in 1930. That's like into the great, that's at its steepest, you know. 1930, 1931 is when it was at its worst. These days, when many are discouraged, in my 93 years of life, depressions have come and gone. Prosperity has always returned and will again. And he knew, because he grew up through similar times. Not a lot of people are familiar with all the other recessions that we've had. But if you go to this website right here, there's actually a government entity that follows this, National Bureau of Economic Research. If you go on their website there, you just put that into Google and you'll find it. You'll see there's a similar recession like this every 4 or 5 years. There's something that happens. This is the Great Railroad Bubble of 1893. 15,000 companies and 500 banks failed. Okay, back to the financing again. Railroads booming. You know, the Industrial Revolution is coming around for the second time. And things are booming, and the banks, they're just getting irresponsible. There's huge mergers and acquisitions, and it just gets to the bubble point, right? And that breaks. 17 to 19% unemployment. That's almost as, you know, it was 25% in the Great Depression. It's almost there, almost as bad. Here's something I found digging around. Middle-class families cannot afford mortgages. Many walk away from homes. This is in 1893. People are underwater. Okay? I mean, it's not a big difference. Great Depression in 1929. Oil crisis of 1973. Remember, OPEC comes onto the scene. Oil goes up 70% in one day, causing, you know, waves to go through everything. Late 80s, early 90s. Remember? Savings and loan crisis of 1986. Basically what happens is the government, they want to make more money, and they see all these people owning this commercial real estate, and they say, oh, you've got all these tax breaks and it's just not fair. We need some of that tax income. So what they do is they take away some of those loopholes that people had to write off, you know, taxes on these big commercial deals. And what happens when you own commercial real estate, just like any other real estate, just like a rental home? It's like owning a business, and there's two ways you can profit from owning a business, right? You can raise revenue, and you can decrease expenses. And one of the biggest expenses you can decrease are taxes. When you take that away, you're reducing that profit. And what does that do to all those businesses? It devalues them. And when that happens, overnight, all that commercial real estate went from here to here, okay? And these banks, everyone's into this, and everyone's going crazy, and everybody's over leveraged. All these guys are underwater, and they're going in foreclosure. 700, remember how many banks were in trouble in 09? 842 or something like that were considered troubled. 747 S&L institutions fail through that crisis. And the government, trying to raise money, you know, by capturing that tax income, actually has to come out of pocket $124 billion. You look at TARP nowadays and what we're losing on that. That was in 1986 money. Soon after the stock market crashed, we're really talking about doom and gloom like we're going into the Great Depression, because we lost 54% on the Dow Jones over 18 months. They lost 31% in 5 days on that crash. The dot-com bubble, $5 trillion in losses. $5 trillion stock market losses in 2 years. And then obviously the Great Recession of 2008. So these are happening all the time, all the time. And anybody wonder why? We know when to buy real estate. Obviously, lifestyles, you know when to buy. It's no rocket science. It's not rocket science. You buy when everybody else is selling, right? And you sell when everybody else is buying. That's kind of John Paul Getty, who kind of made his fortune in the Great Depression through oil interest and real estate interest. That's his famous slogan. He pretty much coined that. When everyone else is selling, hold. When everyone else is buying, or I'm sorry, when everyone else is selling, buy when everyone else is selling, and hold when everyone else is buying. This is not merely a catchy slogan. It's the very essence of successful investments. You would think that would be easy advice to follow, but we don't follow it. And I think one of the reasons why is because of urgency. You've got somebody selling an asset. Everything's going crazy. People are building condos everywhere. People are putting $10,000 down to do their pre-construction condo, and then 6 months later they're selling it to the next investor and they're making 100 grand and all that before the thing's even built. Everything's going crazy. There's urgency there because you're about to buy this thing and it's gone because everybody else is in there. It's right in front of you, then it's gone all the time. But in this day, you go out on the street, you want to buy a house at 50 cents on the dollar, you can look at 100 of them in a day. There's no urgency there. There's nothing really pushing you. So that's when you've got to get it in the driver's seat, and that's what takes discipline. You'd think it would be so easy, but that's what separates guys like John Paul Getty and everyone else, is the discipline to look at these things and know when to buy and know when it's a fool's market and not to get involved in all the hype and all that. This guy, if you prefer to get your advice from somebody that's still alive, here's a good one. Be fearful when others are greedy, and become greedy when others are fearful. Okay? That will make you a fortune. And obviously, you can take it from was he the second or the third richest person in the world today? Isn't Carlos Slim in number 2 right now, behind Bill Gates? And now it's Warren Buffett. You guys should know who that guy is. He just bought a $40 million or $40 billion railroad that's based out of Fort Worth. But anyhow, real estate. I'm going to cover just the pathway that I recommend. And just so you know, I founded Sherman Bridge, and I manage a fund, and we lend, and I've lent money for 2 years, and we've been doing that, and it's been a lot of fun. But before that, I also own a real estate acquisition company that's based in all the major cities in Texas too. And we started out buying bank assets and breaking them up and selling them off to investors. So I guess I know I look young and all that. It's actually my birthday today.
How old are you?
22. No, I just hit 30, believe it or not.
Wow.
But I know I look young, but we've owned this company for 5 years, and I have 2 partners, and we do quite a bit of business, and we've seen a lot of transactions because we do a lot of stuff in bulk, and we've seen a lot. But as far as on the hard money side, and that's what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit about buying with cash, since you do have really out there in the marketplace today, there's really, you use hard money and you refinance, or you use cash. That's just kind of what you do, especially with these foreclosures. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But